it didn't take long, did it? Remember all those warnings from the Conservatives during the general election campaign that if Labour won power, they would put up our taxes? Well, according to the front pages of today's newspapers, it seems that they might well have been right. On Monday, the new Chancellor Rachel Reeves is set to give a pretty major speech in which she is going to set out, as she sees it, the state of this country's public finances right now. And yes, you guessed it, the conclusion is not going to be positive. According to the Chancellor, apparently there is a £20 billion black hole at the centre of UK PLC's budget currently. Spending has run over. Departments have got more that they need to pay for than they've got money coming in. And all in all, 20 billion quid in the red is the bottom line. And that's already got suggestions running wild in Westminster that Rachel Reeves is paving the way, within weeks, in fact, of becoming Chancellor, for tax rises. That this big disclosure about the finances being even worse than they thought is basically a pretext and a precursor to an autumn budget in which the Chancellor stands up in the House of Commons and says, we didn't want to do this. The situation is far, far worse than even we realised when we took power. Taxes are going to have to go up. Now, it's not going to be some taxes because Labour's very, very clearly ruled out increases in income tax, VAT and national insurance. But of course, they were very, very careful not to rule out tax rises in things like inheritance tax, council tax, potentially capital gains tax too. So it looks like, and this is early days, but it looks like tax rises are coming towards us this autumn. Does that worry you, though? Does it worry you? Does it make you worry about how you might be affected by this, how your family, how your business might be affected by this? Or do you think actually it's what this country needs? That Labour's been left with no choice, the economy's stagnant, public services are in a pretty woeful state. It was simply inevitable, given the inheritance that they had from the Conservatives, that taxes are going to have to go up to fix the mess that we have in this country right now. Is it something you'd in fact support if it sorts out the state of the NHS and schools and policing, for example? Or do you just think this was clearly the plan all along? They waited until they were in power, and now it looks like they are, after all, having not committed to it for weeks and weeks during the campaign, they are plotting and planning to put our taxes up after all. What do you make of it? Sensible, necessary, pragmatic approach, or a sign that the Tories are right, in fact, and that Labour has always been planning to put taxes up and has been less than upfront and honest about it? Give me a ring, 0345 6060 973. You can WhatsApp the same number. You can text 84850. Or if you've got an Alexa, shout at it. Alexa, send a comment to LBC and that'll come through right here to me in the studio. Talk to a former Conservative special advisor to Boris Johnson to get his thoughts on the politics of this in just a moment. Let's first this morning talk to Stephen Barber, political economist, Professor of Global Affairs at the University of East London. Stephen, great to have you on the programme this morning. Thank you very much indeed for coming on. Just talk us through exactly what a 20 billion black hole really means, and if indeed that does sound like an accurate portrayal of where we're at. Good morning to you.
Good morning. Yeah, I mean, I think that's obviously what's being reported this morning. And I mean, in a sense, they were always going to say things are much worse than expected, weren't they? And I think people would be forgiven for being sceptical about that, because there were all these warnings from economists during the election campaign that there was this black hole, and 20 billion is, give or take, round about the cost of that last national insurance cut that Jeremy Hunt pushed through in the last budget. So I think people might be sceptical of the politics, but I think no one's really surprised to be told that the public finances are in a woeful state. And we've had some of these very prominent stories as well that really underline the situation recently with the prisons. We've also got, of course, the blood scandal, the post office, and all these things that Rachel Reeves is going to have to find money to cover. And so the purpose of that, the Reeves review, is both to embed that political narrative, which I think you've just articulated, you know, that the Conservatives mismanaged the economy. We're going to hear about Liz Truss crashing the economy again and again and again, and that Labour are fixing it. But I think it also represents this political cover for doing unpopular things, for doing things like raising taxes, which of course, Labour had alluded to or said that they were not going to do during the election campaign.
Stephen, just on that, you had Keir Starmer this week saying the public finances are in the worst state since World War II. I mean, that's a big claim. Is that part of the sort of political, campaigning that you're talking about, or is that just a reality? Is that true?
I think there's a lot of truth in it, and perhaps one of the main reasons that there's truth in that is that our growth rate and our productivity rate overall is in a terrible position. The country simply isn't growing at the rate that it needs to. The economy really needs to be expanding at a rate of about 3 times where it is today, back to the sort of growth levels we enjoyed before the financial crisis, a kind of 2.5% plus a year. So I think we are being softened up for these tax increases, and of course that creates some uncertainty, particularly for those that are looking to invest between now and October.
Stephen, just on that, which taxes do you think are Rachel Reeves will be looking at? If she's got to raise some money from somewhere, where should people be worried that it's going to come out of our pockets?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of things she could do. I mean, she could look to reduce spending, of course, but I think that's unlikely. She could go hardline on public sector pay, but it looks like, and the briefing seemed to be that she's going to accept those recommendations. She could reverse that national insurance cut, but I think she's probably not going to do that. She could borrow some more, but of course the public sector finances and debt is already out of control. So these are all very difficult options. Fiscal drag's the obvious one. The chancellors have loved this for years, where you just don't increase the allowances in line with inflation. That's not going to be enough. She'll probably delay some capital spending, so spending on roads, hospital buildings, things like that will get pushed back. But as you alluded to, the big ticket items are around, well, could she adjust some of the allowances around pensions? Could she adjust some of the allowances around inheritance tax or capital gains tax? And they're probably the areas that she will concentrate on.
Interesting, very interesting indeed. Stephen, thank you so much for your time this morning. Stephen Barber, Political Economist, Professor of Global Affairs at the University of East London. Listening to that was Henry Newman, former senior advisor to Francis Maude, Boris Johnson as Prime Minister, and indeed Michael Grove. Henry, great to have you with us this morning. Thank you very much to you. I guess the Tories will see this as a moment to say, look, we warned you, we told you so. Good morning.
Morning, hi. Yes, they will, and I think most of the public will be quite cynical. We've been reading for weeks now that Labour had a strategy of coming into every department and saying in each area, "Oh wow, it's so much worse than we thought." And I think people will just take that. We'll take that with the cynicism it deserves. I thought the most important intervention on this was the Institute for Fiscal Studies, and they're a kind of very strictly non-affiliated, non-party political body of sort of senior economists. And they said that it just wasn't credible to claim that there was some sort of worse inheritance. In fact, through the whole election campaign, they've been arguing that, in fact, all parties were not being critical enough about the problems in the economy. So I think it's quite difficult for Rachel Reeves now to come in and maintain that there's a new problem that she didn't know about when she was making those previous commitments about tax rises. And I think that is that's the core of the problem.
She didn't, Henry, did she? They didn't rule out some of the tax increases that Stephen was just talking about. They were very clear on VAT, national insurance and income tax. They explicitly didn't rule out tax rises in other areas. And they will say, look, we inherited an almighty mess that the Tories left us. We've got to pay to clear it up. And they'll have a point on that, won't they?
I think I listened carefully to what they said during the election, as you did, obviously, and they ruled out major tax rises very explicitly. Then they went around using sort of politicians' language about other tax changes to council tax, to making a big raid on pensions, which their special advisors now, their advisors sitting in the Treasury have been floating for the last few weeks, but were also floating before the election while they were still in opposition. And on those issues, they kept saying, "Oh, we have no plans," and that's politicians speak for leaving a bit of wiggle room open.
But Henry, on the point about the
inheritance,
inheritance, they are going to justify any tax rises by saying this country is an almighty mess after 14 years of Conservative government. We're going to have to pay to clear it up. And when it comes to the state of public services and the state of the economy, they have inherited a mess.
I think things have definitely been difficult. I don't accept the worst economic inheritance since the Second World War. I think that's completely ridiculous. Many of your listeners will remember when we went cap in hand to the IMF in the mid-1970s in the middle of a complete financial meltdown in this country. Yes, it's true there is a broader problem in many Western countries with growth. And we're definitely experiencing that. And that's why successive Conservative chancellors going back a decade have been so obsessed with getting growth. Fundamentally, though, the Conservatives left a balanced set of books. Now, those books were balanced on the basis of some very difficult decisions around pay restraints, around productivity growth in the public sector, where we've seen productivity flatline for the last 15 years.
So this idea of a 20 million black hole, you reject that, you dispute that?
I do reject that, because I think it was based on, as I was saying, productivity changes. It was also based on reducing the size of the welfare bill. So Jeremy Hunt spoke a lot about that we needed to make sure that we were bearing down on the welfare bill. I think also because that is good for many of the individuals involved to get them off, to get them back into work wherever possible, to make sure that they have the dignity of work in their lives. And I think that the challenges that the Labour Party came in and rejected all that, said that there was no room to squeeze the welfare bill at all, have clearly signalled that they will accept in full the pay review body's recommendations on pay. Now, of course, every chancellor would love to accept the recommendations from pay review bodies all the time, but sometimes you have to make difficult and challenging trade-offs. And that's part of the job of politics.
The trade-offs that would be being made right now if Jeremy Hunt was Chancellor and the Tories had stayed in power would be billions and billions of pounds of tax cuts. That's what was promised. The state of the finances are pretty bad, and your party spent weeks campaigning and promising huge tax cuts. That was completely irresponsible and also dishonest, wasn't it? They couldn't have been delivered.
I think we did deliver tax cuts repeatedly in government. I think most of the public would like to see their personal taxation lower. There's also good economic arguments for doing that, because it encourages people at a macro level and across the whole economy to work more. That means more money coming into the state. But my sort of point is a bit of a broader one. It's that, as you said, I've worked for a variety of different ministers. Mm-hmm. Whenever you're in a department, you have to there are a lot of bleeding stumps, as they're called in Whitehall. There's a lot of bits of your department's responsibilities which have profound needs for spending. I think that's always been the case, and always will be the case. And you therefore have to balance between those things. But I think fundamentally, most people will just take these claims with Labour as pure political cynicism.